What happens, we pay our taxes as good citizens, and then our elected officials spend the money. And so they are walking around wringing their hands today, hoping that a lot of us file because heaven knows they need the money. So here we are on another Tuesday in Hawaii Day, and glad to have with us in the studio the minority Speaker of the House, Aaron Johanson, joins us this morning to talk about, 3 weeks left and counting. Good morning.
Morning, Mike.
I was sort of saying this offhandedly. You know, today's the day we're supposed to pay our taxes and everything and file them. And I know that the Council on Revenues has predicted for Hawaii, in addition to our regular taxes, some better numbers. And it looks like all the hungry birds are circling the nest trying to figure out how to get some of that money.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and certainly you've got the hungry birds, and then you've got the wise owls who are just trying to watch out and see whether or not we really do have the funds to expend for all of the programs that either people are hoping for to be restored or hoping to create, or the different funding levels of government.
Okay, now's your chance to ask Aaron or to talk to Aaron about things that are important to you, because if any time was important, getting down to the brass tacks is. And somebody asked me, and I don't take questions off the air, but somebody did ask off the air, and I think it's a great question. I wish I'd thought about it myself. Is there anything pending requiring a consolidation or an amalgamation or an audit on programs? Is there any legislation pending that would make us take a look at the spending, even if it were appropriated?
There's actually a great bill, not exactly along the lines of what you just mentioned, but getting there. And I think sometimes the legislature is a little slow to get on the common sense bandwagon. But it was actually a bill introduced by Senate President Donna Mercado Kim to lots of truth in accounting mechanisms. In this case, what it would do is we often appropriate money for capital improvement projects. So, whether they're large-scale freeways or something built at your schools. But we don't often know the true cost of things. And she's introduced a bill that's moving, I'm glad to say, that would take into account the sum total of the project in looking at things. So you wouldn't be able to just say, we just need $1 million for planning. Oh, and by the way, it's going to cost $20 million after we build it. And so that bill is alive. I think there is a lot of room, though, for improvement in creating more real truth in accounting type of bills and structures within your state government.
Aaron, what we hear a lot is this word redundancy, and that we do have, very easy to identify applications of double work being done by state and county. And I know that there's real concrete reasons for some of it, excuse the expression concrete, but I do know that some of the reason why there are highway road transportation crews, pothole crews, and all of that stuff is because there's federal monies involved. But doesn't it make sense to say, even though that is the case, can't we have somebody sign off it if it isn't the state government, if it's the county government doing the work?
We see that closer to home in my district than most.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about
because we're the nexus point of so much federal infrastructure with the freeways, the airports, the harbors, but also state and county roads as well. And so if anybody has seen it, it's my community. And sometimes it can be really awkward. You would think that government, regardless of the jurisdiction, would be relatively coordinated. Certainly that's what you would hope for as a taxpayer, but oftentimes it's the left hand and the right hand may not always know what each other's doing, and that's the real trick.
Yeah, what about this? There's a lot of times when something I've heard this so many times in my career, and that is towards the end of every fiscal year, the departments spend money because they're told, hey, you know what? If you don't spend it, next time around you're not going to get it. And I think that's such a awful philosophy, because if anything in a family, they say, bonus, let's not spend it, let's keep it.
Save.
But it seems to me that at department level, that the last minute they buy computers, they buy furniture, they upgrade this, they do a painting on the floor, they do whatever they got to do so they don't have any money left.
Well, I think if there's one thing that folks out there can be happy about, Chair Ige, the Ways and Means Chair in the Senate, is relatively fiscally conservative, and so actually is our new Finance Chair, Sylvia Luke. And one thing that...
Both Democrats, by the way.
Correct.
Yeah.
One thing that the House has tried to show through the House Finance Committee is that we're not necessarily going to conscience the things that government has always just accepted as a norm. That you can just spend frivolously, or you can just request money, and it's just always going to be granted carte blanche. And what you see from... Now, that the Senate didn't necessarily go along with this, but this is something still being debated in conference. But the House defunded funded positions that were vacant for over a year because we wanted the departments and the agencies to have to justify why if the money was appropriated and it was such a critical need, why wasn't the position filled? And so to your point, I think what you'll start to see, particularly as evidenced by this session, is that the House is taking a more conservative approach with respect to budgetary matters. And if there isn't, I think if anybody's going to be sympathetic to it, it's our new finance chair when someone says, look, we actually didn't need this money, and even though we didn't spend it, it's really going to be a need in this next session. So rather than waste it, we're just asking you to approve it next time, even though we didn't spend it this time. And you're probably going to have a much more willing and sympathetic audience in the House now, in the House Finance Committee, because you probably get some praise as opposed to some criticism of why didn't you spend it then.
And, that brings us to an interesting point. And by the way, if you'd like to make a point or ask or contribute, I'm getting a bunch of email. Remember, we do not accept email when we have one of our in-studio newsmakers, so that we don't ever get accused of slanting the program. But I can tell you that I was talking earlier with some people when we were talking about the city. Right now, there seems to be a little rift between the council and the mayor with regarding to some of this empty job posts. And I know that if a department head gets leeway, they're going to want more people, because it's not that they want to spend money. It's that they really believe by having another person on doing this or that, they will be more efficient. But if they don't fill it, what you're talking about here is if it wasn't filled for a year, let's just take the money back.
Right, and it's not that you can't ever get it back, but then just justify. And I think that's the responsible, prudent position for your state government to take on behalf of the taxpayer, that if you haven't made the justification, just as a family would have to make of this is why we're purchasing this is why we're using or not, the same should be expected of government. And I think you're seeing what I hope is a more long-term shift in paradigm of the legislature, particularly in the House, that things are not always a given or a granted, that you should have to be able to justify the need. And if it is truly a need, then we'll go ahead and appropriate it.
There have been so many things that just keep going on and on in perpetuity, it seems. And that's why I think that a lot of people sort of resent when they see maybe a crew of workers on the side of the road, and not all of them seem to be shoveling. And they just say, well, how have we let it get to this point? Well, apparently the good news is that when we got low on funds, that a lot of people started saying the same things, saying, hey, no, we got to contribute to that too. So that being said, has the blanket been lifted off the fire? I mean, is the lure of we're maybe getting more money making us cruise at this last few weeks? Are we still being debating on spending issues?
No, we're still debating quite a bit. I mean, what I will say is the House and the Senate are working very functionally together. And so for those out there who may not understand where we are in the legislative process, now we're in the conference committee phase, which is where all the details that haven't been hashed out, both with respect to the budget as well as bills, where there are disagreements and slight nuances in differences of opinion between the House and the Senate, this is where we all work it out. But particularly with respect to the budget, I think both the House Finance Committee and the Senate Ways and Means Committee made an early attempt to try to get some buy-in. So actually, the Senate ended up agreeing to 2/3 of the House budget, which I think is great, because the House budget was a much more conservative.
It was a lot thinner
approach. Yes. And so 2/3 of the budget has already been agreed to. Chair Ige and Chair Luke both convened us last week, historically very early on, because what they're trying to do, and what I hope is the case, is instead of there being this mad rush and crash at the end where every bill that's a good idea just dies because there's not enough time, or things get passed, at midnight when nobody's able to watch and see, and it's not as transparent as possible. We're trying to front load the process and get things through the pipeline quicker, so that people just have a chance to understand what's going on. So particularly with the budget, what I think you'll see is both chairs and the legislature is aware that just because the forecasts are higher and rosier from the Council on Revenues doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet.
Okay, I kind of love the fact that we are in Hawaii able to live with the mandate of a balanced budget. I may not agree with the budget, but at least I know that everybody at the end, and I guess that there'd be some very good stuff that falls by the wayside because of not enough time to really vet stuff out. But here's another thought, and I'm sort of wondering. I don't think people understand the size our budget has grown to. I mean, we are, if we were to take a look at what is each taxpayer paying, what is that budget? It's a lot of money.
It is.
What is is there a ballpark number that we're looking at is what our budget will probably be?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's going to be a little under $12 billion each year.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there wouldn't be too many people out in the audience that would remember when it was $1 billion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we had, the need to meet a $1 billion budget.
Mm-hmm.
And now a lot of it is inflation, a lot of it is everything else. But isn't a lot of it also economic good times that breeded growth in government?
It is. I mean, I think some of the major cost drivers are increases in social spending. So, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Education, and a few other consume a lot, a vast bulk of the resources of the state government. And so, every time you expand or create a program and you don't wean people off of it, or the population doesn't reduce and it just increases.
Yeah, instead of it going away when it's no longer needed, it increases.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I think, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
I was just going to say, I think that's why there's some promising measures hopefully coming out of the legislature. They're in conference right now that look at just how we, our modern system of distribution for welfare payments, is it a system that penalizes opportunity and growth and a transition to self-sufficiency, or do we have that kind of system in place? And I think we don't, which is why I think there's quite a few bills that are starting to look at, how do we get good jobs for people, economic opportunity, educational opportunity, so that we can reduce some of these major cost drivers.
Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about specifically some of these bills. Now, a lot of them have to do with things like early education. If you've got a question about that, now's the chance to ring in on it. 296-KHNR, 296-5467. Malin Moore is going to ring in on what's happening in traffic on a beautiful Monday morning. T-Day, that's tax day in Hawaii.
KHNR Traffic. To talk to Mike or his guests, call now at 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. Now, here's Mike on AM 690 KHNR.
Okay, so round and round she goes. Hide the marble, nobody knows. Well, the good news is that as we get down towards the end of the legislative session, we start finding out what's left and what's gone and what's likely to go. And one thing that Rep. Aaron Johanson was talking to me about during the break is today is aloha to the PLDC bill today. This is, I think, a prima facie example of how people and citizens and lawmakers took a look at something that looked like a very good idea. Mm-hmm. Didn't work out, so they said, let's not do this because it's not ideal. Maybe we need some of it. Give us a status report on the PLDC as we know it, and what your own either personal or minority feelings are about parts of it that are still going forward.
Sure. I think, as you mentioned, it started out with a worthy intent. I mean, who doesn't want to facilitate good, long-term quality economic growth, whether that's through positive developments that take into account a holistic set of factors. But unfortunately, the process and the sausage-making factory of the legislature, as well as sometimes the midnight sort of clandestine activity, and the implementation and rollout of it was just very problematic, and something that was roundly criticized by a whole host of groups. And what is exciting about this repeal of the PLDC is this is one of the bills that the House chose to make a bipartisan effort. Lots of times people just get the signatures of the representatives that they want, but the lead sponsor of the bill, Representative Cindy Evans, opened it up to everybody. And so almost all of your minority caucus members signed this repeal. And I think people feel like it's a win for transparency. It's a win for openness and making sure that we're respectful of our existing laws and checks and balances, and not just looking to make quick carve-outs, even if it is in the name of something that might be positive.
Yeah, and there's no question that it was, for a long time, pretty positive. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think actually...
Really, really worthy intent.
Yeah, like you said, there are actually parts of it that make sense going forward, but are they the good parts or the bad parts? And I don't know, because I don't have the ability to look at bills like you all do, and especially with staff that are akamai, and just say, well, is this is this just going going out the back door and coming in the side window? Are there any bills that are going forward that represent parts of the PLDC that are not good?
My personal opinion is there are not too many bills that do have some incarnation of the bad parts of the PLDC. There are there are differences of opinion. Some of my colleagues, we have a spirited debate all the time among our minority caucus, and some of them would say that bills that do exhibit some of these PLDC-like traits are the 21st Century Schools bill that would allow you to utilize some of what is presently underutilized land to potentially redevelop to generate revenue for that particular school and its improvements. There also
and that's not just an environmental concern. That's a concern about, do we need the space later, and do we give something out that we can't take back?
Appropriateness of what might go next to a school. All kinds of workability issues arise with that particular bill. There's also there might be some bills alive that have limited pilot projects that specifically give a preference to, whether it's a harbor development or something like that.
Okay, so now when you say that we say goodbye to it today, what does that mean? Does that mean that it gets tabled?
Here's what it means. Actually, we passed it quickly out of the House. It was one of the first bills that we passed out of the House.
That was many weeks ago.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the Senate amended it, but very quickly passed it back to us. And what we've decided to do is to take those, those nuanced amendments. They're not terribly different changes to the bill, and we're just adopting it. And so once we vote on it today, because we're accepting the Senate's changes, then it'll go straight up to the governor to be signed. Yeah,
now it seems to me, and you know what I think it is, once again, go back, because we have a lot of other bills that I'd like to discuss, but let's talk about the finality of it going away, and the fact that it is another example of, wow, there was such a hue and outcry here.
Right.
Real
win for democracy.
I can't see anything of late that has more a positive message than the repeal of this bill.
And what's really amazing about it that you rarely see at the legislature is the confluence of very different groups that came together to support its repeal. You had environment.
Does that make you feel good as an individual? Wow, hey, we can work together on some stuff?
It does, and that democracy can actually work. A vibrant, functioning democracy can have great results that reflect the will of the people. And whether it was, in this case, you had the environmentalists who were upset that it was flouting what they felt were responsible environmental and land use laws. You had good government folks who said, most of this isn't transparent. There was no time to really weigh in on this. You had other people, just community advocates saying, I'm not sure if, I think this is going to be good for our community, and there's no nexus for our ability to just input on this project that might radically change our landscape. So it was an amazing confluence of people, Republicans, Democrats, independents, environmentalists, community advocates, good government people that just often you don't see together unanimously standing against something.
I want to recall something that's on a national level, that is when the affordable health care or the Obama bill went forward. There were many that said, look, we didn't even read it. We don't know what's in it. We don't know what to do about it. But they said, well, just sign it, and we'll read it later. Are there any bills, and we're going to talk about this after the news break coming up, are there any bills that are like that here now that are pretty, wordy? And I mean, somebody saying, well, come on, we can fix this later, but we really need this bill to happen.
I think they're post PLDC, and the PLDC was good because I think it really sort of awoke this sleeping giant of a healthy dose of skepticism about different bills and what's percolating through the legislature.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll come back. Aaron Johanson's in the house. We're getting bombed by email, but not reading them, because you need to call in live with your questions or your comments at 296-KHNR. That's 296-5467. We got a news break coming up. It's 7:30 on the Mike Buck radio program. We'll be back right after this. And don't forget, Jimmy Buffett back on Hawaii 5-0 tonight, going to North Korea. How timely is that? Speaking about timely, it is a timely time for you to pay attention when we talk about some of these measures that we're talking about, to actually write down bill numbers. And more importantly, find out where they are. Like I told you earlier, Representative John Mizuno and citizen Chris Latham joining us in the next segment of the program to discuss House Bill 395, which is among the bills being discussed and moving forward. And the important part here is to find out what these bills are about. This one is about custodial time that parents get to spend in divorces. And I know, without getting on to that discussion, it's interesting, Aaron, that sometimes bills that have personal, involvement, it means that there are people that get out and really want to explain what their ideas are. And I want to make sure that people understand the importance of that, particularly now that we are, 20 days away or 21 days away from the end of the session, that you guys rely on the input of people like our next guest and like others to come forward and give concrete reasons why they are for or against something.
We do, and you know what? Personal advocacy, especially one that's impassioned, sometimes makes the most effective advocate. I mean, there are different pieces of legislation that literally move because one or two people have spent so much of their time, their personal capital, their resources, and just put their whole heart and soul into lobbying the legislature.
I want to tell you that we've talked about that before, and one thing that I think is very important, and you talk about the way that you personally, as Representative Aaron Johanson, want to see communication or feelings from your constituents, and you use everything. You use social media, you use faxes and everything else. But if 300 people show up at a hearing, all wearing a silkscreen T-shirt with a point on it, I mean, the powers that be, the legislators, they know, they can see it, right? They know what the angle is from that group or this group.
I mean, it's still, but large numbers still affect people.
Sure.
That's just basic psychology. But at the same time, I think also, everybody knows how touching it is to just have that one person that is fighting with all of their might, just to get something done, and that is equally powerful.
Okay, let's talk about some of the things we were talking about before the break. Some of the things moving forward that are good, some that are bad, and some that are ugly.
Well, I think again today, repeal the PLDC. We have different good bills that I think will put us in good fiscal stead, recapitalizing the Hurricane Relief Fund, adding to the Rainy Day Fund. All those things will help improve our bond ratings and I think
if
restore
we did
some
that,
trust.
If we did that, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think that this is an important question. If we did that, because there are many that resent slush funds or rainy day funds of any kind because they set them up and then they get robbed. Is there any way to have a fund recreated or refunded with a caveat saying this is specifically for this and cannot be rated?
You could symbolically, but the truth is no legislature, a present legislature cannot bind the actions of a future legislature.
Yeah,
So,
isn't it the reason why some budgets only go forward so long, some contracts with unions only go forward so long because the outgoing group can't burden the incoming group?
Yeah, and so, I think that's where the electorate really needs to speak loudly and clearly to people when they say we're going to, raid this fund and raid that fund. If you don't want it, that's when you need to tell your legislator because, there's mechanically we can make it more difficult to take things out. But the truth is, the legislature and the legislative body is given broad powers.
Because once you're gone, right? And the new guys say, hey, I don't care what those guys said. This is the reality of it. We need that money.
I also think there are some other great bills moving. The House passed out a reduction in the TAT, which should help the tourism industry out and help grow the economy. The Senate agreed to moving our vehicle along our House bill that reduced personal income tax rates across the board for lower, middle, and upper income as well as small businesses. So, you're actually seeing quite a few measures moving this session that are some tax relief as opposed to the per usual mantra of the legislature, which is tax increases.
Okay, but let's make sure that we're not, this is not the old up 10, down 20 trick or up 20, down 10 trick. Because the fact of the matter is we have the largest state budget that we've ever looked at. And that means without ways to increase revenue that we can't make that budget. So what are some of the things that are going forward that you may not like that are vehicles, that are bills that are designed to create the revenue, which we need, but we may not need it in that form?
Yeah, there are some changes to the conveyance tax that might increase revenue there. There's a use tax, so for those online retailers that are not presently charging some of the state taxes when they assess you, whether it's Amazon or some of the other online retailers that don't have a physical presence here. So you are correct. By no means, again, are we out of the woods. There are still some measures alive, comparatively less, but still some alive that might exacerbate the cost of living for folks out there.
Now, you did mention the online. Now, we do know that there's already a decision made about some travel businesses. The Travelocity.com, all of these guys that owe, I think, $50 million in taxes. There are many that say, well, that's well and dandy, but it's never going to be collected. These people just start doing business with us. We are getting closer and closer, it seems, at not just our state, but at other states, to try and reach out to the web purchases and demand payment.
And there's a lot of states who have done that, quite honestly. I just actually saw a chart of how many states, and there are some big ones, including some of the ones that are dominated by Republicans like Texas and Virginia, that Arizona, that already have some form of a use tax enacted.
But isn't it interesting, though, that many of us use, I did this yesterday. I had to go out I went out yesterday and bought a new power washer, okay? But before I did, because I went to a store and I saw it, and I thought, well, that looks good. I went home and I thought, you know what, I got to go get it. But I'm just going to go online first to see if it's okay. And on the very same unit, I could have saved $40. Okay, but I needed it, so I went and got it yesterday afternoon. But how many of us do this as a habit now and would rather shop online and resent the government going in and saying, why are you taking away my ability to save money?
Well, no, that's true, and I think that's why your minority caucus all voted no on this particular measure, because at the end of the day, it's just going to increase your cost of living. And we're certainly understanding. I mean, I think the best case that can be made for it, again, it didn't make me vote yes on it, but it does. Some small businesses would tell you that it does hurt them, that they're having to pay all these state taxes because they have a physical bricks and mortar presence here, but the online retailers are circumventing them. But I think again, in a free market, if you're probably offering something that Amazon.com isn't offering, people may still end up buying it at their local mom and pop shop.
Yeah, and gang, there's still something to be said about service and one-on-one and being able to look eyeball in eyeball or shake somebody's hand, particularly if it becomes a large purchase. But these things are adding up to the point where I think that you guys, this current legislative session, is probably experiencing more than the past ever on how many people use alternate measures to shop and to buy.
Yeah, online retailing continues
huge.
To grow.
Yeah. So, but then that means that then there are a lot of people who look at it, well, if you start controlling that, you're only a heartbeat away from controlling content or preventing, some things to be. Aren't there some countries that actually block large sections of the internet to their citizens?
There are, but I don't think those countries, have a First Amendment or a Bill of Rights that they actively try to uphold. So I'm not sure if a use tax is the door opening to that. Okay,
what about something else that may come? You mentioned the online and that the minority caucus is diametrically opposed to that. What else? I know that there have been both at the county and the state levels different things wanted. For instance, Governor Abercrombie was looking at the plastic bag bill. Didn't make it, but is it going forward?
No, it is not.
Yeah.
The single-use checkout bag fee is not. The sugary beverage tax that the governor wanted is not. A lot of these measures are not. The Senate changed the barrel tax increase that came out of the House, which many of us voted against. I think they made that less of an actual tax. You can tell there's not a lot of appetite for it. There certainly wasn't with the city council and the mayor. So,
sure.
But a lot of what I think are the most egregious tax and fee increases have been mitigated. Knock on wood and crossing our fingers that they stay that way through the conference committee.
Okay, now we're going to go to a traffic break. When we come back, we're going to discuss some of the bills that are going through the Senate and the House, and these are bills that are sort of maybe picking up where the difference between the counties and the state leave off. In other words, when we talk about things like why would the state legislature be involved in the bus schedule in Honolulu, and why would there be all of this looking after a rail project by factions of the state? We'll get into that more when we return. If you'd like to participate in the conversation, remember, only one way to do it, and that's by telephone. No text, thank you very kindly, and no email, thank you very much. 296-5467. Mail and more. Traffic. Man Alive at 7:45.
KHNR Traffic on AM 690 KHNR.
Just another little reminder that Jimmy Buffett, Let's Have Another Margarita, is back on Hawaii 5-0 tonight, and it's about North Korea, which is pretty interesting. They stay pretty timely with those things. So that's tonight. And don't forget, coming up right after our discussion this morning with Representative Aaron Johanson, we're gonna talk more legislature. A certain House Bill 395 is at a very important juncture, and you're going to find out about it. It's to do with families, and anything to do with families gets very, very interesting. And you mentioned before, I think we ought to reiterate before we get involved with Rep. John Mizuno and our friend Chris Latham, that this time of the year, when people take the time and and not just spending the money, but get out and do that, it must do you a lot of good to be able to look somebody in the eye, even if you don't agree with them, and talk story with them a little bit.
That is so true.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to some of these things. Before we do, let's go to our one of our regular pals checking in from Kaneohe, Don, who I think, Don, if I'm not mistaken, do you call every single talk show on our station?
I guess so.
Yeah, well, some of it's very
Morning,
timely.
Don.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. You know, I was reading the newspaper. I'm visually impaired, but I listened to it on my news line. Sunday's paper had an article about a new bill about pedestrian and bicyclists, a new bill that's going out, where if a motorist hits somebody, it's really a big fine and term time in jail or whatever. My concern is there's two factors about this: is the pedestrian and the bicyclist need to be wearing proper clothing, because sometimes these guys don't wear helmets, they don't wear vests, so you can't see them. Even in broad daylight, I witnessed a accident on Nuano and Kuakini, and the guy was coming right down Nuano on his bicycle, and the driver was turning on left on Kuakini from Nuano, and he didn't see the guy because the guy's clothing wasn't proper clothing for reflecting. Mm-hmm. So there's got to be something where the bicyclists and pedestrians. I wear a shirt when I'm walking because I can't see. I want people to know I'm around. So
that's a great point. Every morning when I come in here, there's people darting across crosswalks on King Street wearing dark clothing, and it's dark. Mm-hmm. I can't see them. So thank goodness I'm not somebody that's had a couple too many martinis on the way home from a cocktail. Don, that's a great point, and thanks for bringing it up. And I think that's important because in some respects, some people say some of these bills are like a driver or a bicyclist are playing chicken with the other party because they think they're supported by a law that's going to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm. No, my dad always makes the point, you can be legally right, but if you're not around, to celebrate that Pyrrhic victory, it's just a Pyrrhic victory.
Isn't it also true that a lot of these pieces of legislature are they make people that write them and people vote on them feel good, but they just don't get enforced because we can't enforce everything.
We often hear a common refrain from HPD that they have got a lot on their hands, and what they typically will say is if we're out investigating a homicide or a violent crime, do you want us to be doing that, or do you want us to be monitoring the
pick your poison.
level of a noise emanating from a car? I mean both obviously depending on who you are impact you, but they often tell us that they just don't have the resources to be able to enforce every single law that we pass.
Okay, Aaron, let's talk a little bit about the them and us syndrome, and that is there's an awful lot of angst, I know, at the county level and the state level to get the revenues to do the budgets, and quite frankly, you mentioned earlier that the minority caucus is saying great with respect to the TAT. We're backing off. We're getting a little bit more real about that, but the counties are just as stressed as the state. Let's talk about some of that and some of the crossover stuff that I know is looking at you right now. There's some bills that are going to take away from either the state, and there's some ordinances that are going to take away. Mm-hmm. Add to the cities. What are some of those?
Well, a big one that's dominating quite a bit of the legislative talk right now is the governor's early learning programs. Mm-hmm. If they pass, and it requires a constitutional amendment first, but then there is a two-phase program that comes after. One, to pick up the junior K folks in their phase one that have been left out since we repealed junior kindergarten. But after that, then their massive early learning preschool program would cost upwards of $100 million every single year. So there are significant cost drivers out there in the future, and we're having to decide now. Can we fund that, and at what expense does a program come?
Yeah. That being said, that's I think that is. Would you agree that bill would seem to be getting the most attention because it affects so many people?
It's getting a lot of attention, and it's his signature initiative.
Yeah.
So what was interesting for us to see in the Finance Committee is most times his cabinet directors disagree on different bills, but every single cabinet director testified on the early learning bill in support of it. So it's clearly where the administration is putting a lot of its firepower and a lot of its I think hopes as a signature initiative. What
a lot of people that have called us is, and I'd be interested in how you think, not just personally, but how you think the caucus feels, is that, on the surface, this looks like such a wonderful no-brainer, but that the money actually trickling down to go to the kids is a small portion of what the program would cost. In other words, whenever you crank up something new, you have huge costs that are associated with the program. You said $100 million. How many goes right to a classroom?
Well, and the $100 million is the floor. That's not necessarily the ceiling. So there's a lot of workability issues with it. I think there's at least in the House, maybe not so much in the Senate, but in their House, even across the aisle, there's a lot of trepidation about this new initiative and whether it's fully fleshed out and been thought through. And some would say that it has, but I could tell from the Finance Committee hearing when the governor was present. I mean, he and his early learning director were there for almost 2 hours having to answer a lot of difficult questions just about what this looks like, what it entails, how much it costs, and whether it's all been thought out.
What we're doing is we're looking at being along the high list of states per capita spending on kids. And we keep saying that we're different. Are there primary differences? I mean, are there other states that have models that we can fashion ourselves after? We seem to be very, very top heavy at the non-teaching end of what education costs us. What are we doing wrong? I mean, why are we always discussing needing more money for teaching and having results that don't reflect the money we're spending?
I think that's a great question, and that's why, quite honestly, an audit of the DOE is needed, because you ask any teacher and they'll tell you, that the money isn't necessarily flowing into the classrooms.
Yeah, likewise, which is where it needs to be.
Likewise, if you ask principals, they'll say, we're so constrained with our weighted student formula that we can barely hire our teachers, and that's why teachers are often spending their own money to buy school supplies for their classrooms, and a lot of personnel in the DOE are giving disproportionately, but you got to ask at the end of the day, where's the money? And if it's not going to the classroom or the school, where is it going?
That's a great question. We did get that come up with our David Ramirez, our tax expert, a couple of weeks ago, when a teacher called up to ask if the money that he spent on supplies for his kids was the deductible item, and it's really not. And so that's a hard thing. Now, before we say aloha for today, I want to make sure that we hit one thing really quickly, and that is, you mentioned that a constitutional amendment is necessary, and that is true on a lot of things. We have not had a constitutional convention in the state of Hawaii since 1978, and that's a long time. Has the minority caucus, or have you been trying to put forward the suggestion that we maybe need to have a con-con?
I think it really hasn't come up since the Lieutenant Governor Iona pushed it a few years ago, and it failed miserably. Traction,
do you have any personally any feelings one way or another against for it or against it?
I think it's always healthy, to take a look and make sure that government is serving you in the way you want to be served, and whether that bears out in the need for a constitutional convention or restructuring the way we do things and different paradigms at the legislature. I'm open to a lot of things.
Okay, so now just before you go, and before we get our Chris Latham and John Mizuno in to talk about a specific bill, let's talk about today. Today's PLDC. Goodbye. What else?
Today's PLDC goodbye. We're beginning conference committees, so in a few hours I'll be pouring over the budget with the Senate conferees as well as the House Finance Committee, and pretty soon our subject matter committees will start up again. And so this is definitely the time, if you've got feelings one way or the other about a piece of legislature, to let your feelings be known, or otherwise hold your peace. Yeah, you got about 2.5 weeks. Yep. Boy, that's pretty quick. Now, there are any number of us that are sitting there trying to do your taxes. And you told me
Rep. Johanson, that you had some friends that were doing their taxes today. You done?
I filed it.
Good for you. And my friend David Ramirez has made an exception for me. Thanks so much. And you know,
Thank you, Mike.
Good job on getting the word out. And once again, a tremendous mahalo to everybody on both sides of this PLDC issue that came up and made their points, because I think that this is the best example that I can think of for a long time
of robust
of stuff your government really at work. Okay, have a good day today.
You too.
Okay, when we come back after the top of the hour news, let's talk about a particular bill